the morning Cecily Barrow first crossed the threshold of Ashvale Hall. The north wing was already forbidden. She did not learn this from the housekeeper, who had said only that the position was unusual, and the compensation was generous. She did not learn it from the footman who carried her trunk up the servants' stair without meeting her eyes. She learned it from the sound the house made when she walked too close to the corridor that turned east off the main gallery. It was a silence that was not emptiness, but prohibition, the kind of quiet that has been practiced for so long it has taken on the quality of stone. It was October of 1814, the first cold week of it, and Cecily had come to Ashvale not because she wished to, but because her father's debts had arranged her life for her, after his death that spring. She was 23 years old and had been educated well above her prospects, which had proved useful in the way that a good knife proves useful in a poor kitchen. She could manage household accounts, read French, play adequately, and keep her expression composed while someone spoke carelessly of her situation. These were the tools she had. She used them. The position was not governess, not lady's companion, not precisely anything the house had required before. Lord Ambrose Calloway, the Earl of Ashvale, had written to the agency requesting someone to organize and catalogue the library, which had not been properly attended in 3 years. The compensation was, as the agency had noted, unusually generous. The previous 2 women sent for the position had left within a week. The agency had not explained why. Cecily, whose alternatives were limited, had not asked. She had 4 trunks, 1 good gown, 2 plain ones, and a small tortoiseshell comb that had belonged to her mother. She brought the comb because it was the only thing she owned that had not been touched by her father's creditors, and because it gave her something to press her palm against in the mornings when the day assembled itself into its particular shape and she had to decide again what she would make of it. The housekeeper, Mrs. Prentice, was a compact woman of 60 with the kind of face that had once been warm and had learned over years of service to hold that warmth in reserve. She showed Cecily her room, a decent one near the first-floor landing, and then she showed her the library, which was down a half-flight and through a paneled door that stuck. And then she paused at the turn in the corridor, her hand resting on the wall as if she were measuring something. "The north wing," Mrs. Prentice said, her voice carrying the particular flatness of a sentence that had been said before. "You will have no occasion to go there. The library is entirely contained in the east end of the house." Cecily looked at the corridor. It was not dark precisely. It was merely unlit. "Of course," she said. What she did not know, standing there with her valise still in her hand, was that before the week was out, she would stand in that corridor in the gray hour before dawn, and she would not be alone. If the question of why the north wing was sealed had an answer the servants shared, Cecily did not find it. The footman, Thomas, was 17 and had joined the household only 2 months before. The cook, Mrs. Saxt. Hayward set her jaw at the subject, with the precision of someone tightening a knot. The parlor maid who brought Cecily her morning tea was named Harriet, and Harriet had the look of a girl who had once asked and had decided never to ask again. It was Harriet who let slip, on the 3rd day, that Cecily was the 6th woman sent for the library position in the last 4 years. "6?" Cecily said, keeping her voice even. Harriet looked at the floor. "Yes, miss. Though not all of them left because of the north wing. Some left because of him." By him she meant the Earl of Ashvale. Cecily had not yet met him. She had been told he was in residence, but she had seen no evidence of it beyond the fact that the library fire was laid each morning before she arrived, and that sometimes, working late in the stacks, she heard footsteps in the room above, slow and regular, back and forth, as if a man were walking the length of a room he already knew by heart. She had formed no particular idea of him from what she had heard. He was 36, she thought, or perhaps 38. He had inherited young following his father's death and then his elder brother's, and he had managed the estate without apparent pleasure or complaint for the past 7 years. He was not married. He was, by the servant's careful non-description of him, a man who generated the particular quality of discretion that forms around someone people are afraid to speak of directly. This was the season's assessment of him. He was cold, that much they agreed on, difficult, and that whatever had happened in the North Wing 3 years ago had made him both these things more so. Cecily did not yet know the shape of what had happened. She knew only the word that Harriet did not say, but that had floated in the silence after him. A name, a loss, something the house had swallowed and was still digesting. She continued cataloging the library, which was in serious disorder, and which she found, despite everything, genuinely satisfying to manage. The previous catalogers, wherever they had gone, had made useful starts. She carried their work forward, adding her own system, and she did not go near the corridor that turned east off the main gallery. On the 5th morning, the Earl came to the library. She was on the rolling ladder at the far end of the room, her back to the door, and she heard the door open, and then nothing for a moment, which told her he had stopped. She came down the ladder in a deliberate, unhurried movement, because she had learned that the manner in which a woman descends a ladder in front of a man who is watching is itself a kind of statement. He was standing near the reading table. He was taller than she had imagined, though she had not precisely imagined him, and he was dressed plainly for a man of his rank. A dark coat, no cravat pin, no particular concession to the formalities of mourning. His hair was dark and slightly disordered. His face was the kind of face that had once been easier and had, since learned a different register. The jaw held at a particular angle, the eyes attentive, in a way that was not warmth, but was not dismissal either. He looked at her as though he were trying to determine what she was. "Miss Barrow," he said. "My lord," she said. He said nothing further for a moment, and Cecily had been in enough awkward silences to know this one was not hostile. It was evaluative. He was measuring something, though she could not yet say what. "Mrs. Prentice tells me you have reorganized the East Stacks." He did not make it a question. "I have begun a new catalog system," Cecily said. The previous one was not incorrect, but it was organized by acquisition date rather than subject. For a working library, subject grouping is more useful. Something in his expression shifted, though it was so small a shift she nearly missed it. Not approval, not quite. The edge of a recognition, as if he had said a thing he had expected not to hear. "Continue," he said, and left. If this was dismissal, she had received warmer ones. She went back up the ladder. It should be noted here, for the listener who may be wondering, that the first voicing of what Cecily was to the house came not from the Earl but from Lady Meredith Forsyth, who arrived on the 9th day for an unannounced call and found Cecily in the entrance hall, having just received a delivery of new catalogue cards, 4, ink on her fingers, and her plain gray gown unpresentable, even by the standards of service. Lady Meredith was 25, and had the sort of beauty that had been carefully tended since childhood, the kind that arrives at a room ahead of its owner and makes its assessment before anyone has spoken. She wore rose silk trimmed in ivory, and her expression as she looked at Cecily was the expression of someone encountering furniture in an unexpected position. "The librarian," she said, and the word in her mouth was not a title. It was a category. A reducing of the situation to its simplest elements. Cecily set down the catalogue cards. "Miss Barrow," she said. "I assist with the library." Lady Meredith's gaze traveled once over the ink on Cecily's fingers and did not travel back. She had already decided something, and she had decided it in the way that people who have never been required to reconsider decide things with full confidence and no residue of doubt. "Of course," she said. The Earl received Lady Meredith in the drawing-room. Cecily returned to the library. She did not press her palm to the tortoiseshell comb, because she had not yet reached the point where she was required to. But she pressed it that evening, alone in her room, in the dark, before she went to sleep. She had been at Ashvale 12 days when she first saw the door to the north wing open. It was 5:30 in the morning, and she had risen early because a cold had settled over the house in the night, and the flue in her room needed attending. She had wrapped herself in her heavier shawl and gone down the servant's stair for a poker. And on her way back up, she had passed the turn in the corridor and seen, for the first time, that the door at its end stood open. Not wide open, the width of a man's hand. No more. She should not have gone toward it. Everything in the house's accumulated silence told her not to. She went toward it anyway, because she had spent the last 12 days cataloging the behavior of a house that was organized around a prohibition, and because she had always understood that what a thing refuses to show is frequently the only thing worth knowing. She stopped 3 feet from the door. Through the gap she could see darkness, and at its far edge the gray suggestion of a window. And in the center of the room, just visible, the shape of a piano. The door swung open a further inch, and she understood from the quality of the air that someone was on the other side. She took a step back. The door did not open further. She heard very clearly the sound of a single key struck on the piano, and then nothing. And then the door pulled itself shut from the inside with the soft certainty of a man who had decided against something. Cecily stood in the corridor for a moment with her shawl around her shoulders and the poker in her hand, and she felt the specific weight of a thing she did not yet understand pressing on her in the dark. She went back to her room. She put the comb on the table by the bed, where she could see it. The Earl did not dismiss her. He came to the library again 2 days later, and this time he stayed longer. He asked about the cataloging system with the precision of someone who had used libraries seriously, and Cecily answered in kind, and by the end of the exchange she understood 2 things. He was considerably more intelligent than the house's careful silence about him had suggested. He was doing something with the library visits that he could not have named directly. He was checking on her, not her work. Her! This was not vanity. She had learned, after her father's death, to read the quality of attention that others gave her with accuracy rather than hope, because hope was expensive and she could not currently afford it. The Earl's attention had a specific character, arriving without context, slightly longer than necessary, withdrawing before it could be identified as anything. She did not know what to do with it. She catalogued the shelves. On the 17th day she went back to the north wing. This was not entirely her choice. She had been fetching a particular volume from the east end of the main gallery when she heard, from the corridor that turned east, a sound that was not footsteps and was not the house settling. It was the sound of something falling, something small and hard, the kind of sound a man makes when he sets something down too quickly. She went to the corridor entrance and stopped. The door to the north wing was closed. There was light under it, a thin gold line, firelight or candle, and she heard, from inside, a voice that said one word very quietly to no one she could see. The word was a name. A woman's name, spoken with the particular care of someone who has not allowed himself to say it aloud in a long time. Cecily stood in the corridor until the light under the door went out. Then she went back to the library and stood for a long time with her hand on a shelf, not seeing the books. She had, in the last 17 days, built a careful structure of usefulness and composure around herself, the same structure she had built after her father's death. Because a woman without resources must have composure, if she has nothing else. She had not expected to feel, standing in a cold gallery in the dark, that the structure had a seam in it. The name he had spoken was Eleanor. She did not know who Eleanor was. She did not ask. She understood, in the way that bodies understand things before minds permit them, that the north wing was not simply locked. It was tended, and the man who tended it was not cold in the way the servant's silence had suggested. He was cold in the way that water is cold when it is covering something it cannot let rise. She pressed her palm to the cone that night, and thought about her father's face in the last weeks, the way grief had rearranged his features from the inside. She understood that kind of cold. She had worn it herself. What she had not expected was to feel for the first time in 7 months something adjacent to recognition. If you have stayed this far into Cecily's story, you already know she is not a woman who mistakes kindness for love or attention for safety. Leave a thought in the comments if you have met someone like her. We will return to Ashvale now because the North Wing is not finished with her." 3 weeks into her service, Cecily made an error of timing. She had been working in the library until well past 9 in the evening, because she had found behind a set of mislabeled folios a collection of musical manuscripts that were neither catalogued nor housed correctly, and that were, as far as she could determine, quite old. She carried them to the reading table and examined them with the lamp turned high, and she lost track of the hour entirely. She was returning to her room when she saw the Earl in the gallery. He was standing at the window at the gallery's far end in his shirt-sleeves coat discarded, and he was looking at nothing in particular in the dark outside. He held a glass that was nearly empty. He had not heard her on the stair. She would have withdrawn if she could have done so, without his noticing. She could not. He turned. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not read, and then he looked at the manuscripts in her arms. "Hasper." "What are those?" he said. "Musical manuscripts," Cecily said. "I found them behind the Houghton folios. They appear to be 18th century, possibly earlier. They are not currently in the catalogue." He set his glass down on the windowsill very carefully. Where were they? Third shelf from the floor, east end, behind a set of volumes that are marked incorrectly as correspondence. He was quiet for a moment. The candle in the wall sconce was burning low, and in that light, his face had a quality she had not seen during the library visits, something stripped, an arrangement that was not quite composed. "She hid them there," he said. Not to Cecily. To himself, or to some version of the room that contained more than the two of them. "I looked for those for 2 years." Cecily did not ask who she was. She held the manuscripts and waited. He seemed to collect himself by degrees. When he looked at her again, the composed arrangement had returned, though it sat slightly differently on his face than it had before. "Leave them on the table," he said. "I will attend to them in the morning." "Of course, my lord," she said. She turned to go. "Miss Barrow." His voice was low and level. She stopped. "You have been here 3 weeks, and you have not asked about the North Wing. It was made clear to me, on my first day, that the North Wing is not my concern," Cecily said. A pause. "The others asked within the first 4 days." She turned her head, not quite facing him. "The others were perhaps curious about the prohibition. I am curious about the library. They are not the same thing." She could not see his face from this angle, but she heard, in the quality of his silence, something she could not name. Not approval. Something that preceded approval. The beginning of a question he had not yet formed. "Good night, my lord," she said, and went to her room. The manuscripts, she learned later from Mrs. Prentice, had belonged to the late Countess of Ashvale, Eleanor Calloway, born Eleanor Vane, who had died in childbed 3 years before in the North Wing in February, taking with her the boy who had not survived the night. The piano in the North Wing had been hers. The manuscripts on the shelves had been hers. The room had been hers. The room she had made her own in the particular way that people who love music make a room their own, with the instrument at the center and everything else arranged around it. The Earl had sealed it the morning after she died. He had not entered it for 3 months, and then, by the evidence available, he had entered it at intervals ever since, alone, at odd hours, and every woman who had been sent to the library had found her way to the corridor, and every one of them had, in one way or another, pressed on the prohibition. Cecily had not pressed on it. This was not indifference. It was the understanding which she had acquired the hard way, that grief is not a room to be entered by anyone who has not been invited. She was in the library the following morning when the Earl arrived with the manuscripts she had left on the reading table. He set them down, and she continued her work at the far end of the room, and for a long time neither of them spoke. "She played every morning," he said at last. "Not a beginning. The middle of something." "The manuscripts are in very good condition," Cecily said carefully. "Whoever cared for them before understood paper." She did. He was looking at the cover of the first one, his hand open on the table beside it, without touching it. She was better than I was at nearly everything, but especially at music. Cecily came down from the ladder and stood at the end of the reading table. She did not approach closer. She did not speak. She used to say, he said very quietly, that the north wing was the only room in the house where she could hear herself think. She said the library was mine, and the drawing room was my mother's, and the north wing was hers. He turned the manuscript by its edge without opening it. I have not been able to think of anything useful to do with that fact. There is nothing useful to do with it, Cecily said. It simply is what it is. He looked at her. It was the first time he had looked at her in the library with his face uncollected, and she held the look without flinching because she had spent the last 30 days learning that composure, in this house, was not distance but its own kind of presence. You lost your father this spring, he said, not cruelty. Observation. Yes, my lord, and came directly here. There was nothing to stay for, Cecily said. The house was sold to cover the debts. My sisters are established. I am not. You are not sorry for yourself, he said again. Not cruelty. Something close to wonder. I am sometimes sorry for myself, she said. In the evenings, I do not find it productive past a certain point. Something happened in his face that she could not quite name, because it moved too quickly, not a smile, not precisely. Something that had once known how to be a smile, and was now recalling its shape. You are unlike any librarian I have employed, he said. I suspect I am unlike any librarian you have employed. In several respects, my lord, Cecily said. You have chiefly employed women who are sent here by the agency, which tends to send competent women. The difference may be that I require the position. He was quiet for a moment. Sit down, Miss Barrow, he said. It was a command, delivered in the voice he used for commands. She sat down across the reading table from him, and he opened the first manuscript. And he began to tell her haltingly, and with the precision of a man who has not spoken of a thing for 3 years, about the woman who had hidden it. She listened. She did not offer comfort, and she did not pretend the listening was comfortable. She simply sat, and the library fire burned, and the morning assembled itself around them in its October light. The pivot, when it came in 2 stages, and Astea's. The first stage was the discovery, on the 43rd day of her service, that Lord Gerald Forsyth, Lady Meredith's brother, and a man with whom the Earl had a long financial acquaintance, had written to advise that the agency position at Ashvale was being discussed in London in a manner the Earl might wish to know about. The letter reached the Earl at breakfast. Cecily did not know its contents until Mrs. Prentice told her carefully that Lord Gerald had written to suggest that the Earl's arrangement with a female librarian who worked alone and at odd hours was attracting comment. The comment, Mrs. Prentice did not need to specify, was of the sort that attached itself to the woman rather than the man. Miss Barrow, Mrs. End, Prentice said with the careful flatness she reserved for statements she wished she did not have to make. Lord Forsyth has suggested to his lordship that a female assistant in the library may not be, as he put it, suitable for continued residence. Has his lordship? Responded, Cecily said. Not as yet. Mrs. Prentice said. Cecily went to the library and continued her work. She pressed her palm to the comb in her pocket. The second stage was Lady Meredith's arrival the following afternoon. She came with her mother, the formidable Lady Forsyth, whose reputation in 3 counties was arranged around the single fact that she was never incorrect. They arrived in a carriage that was designed to be seen arriving, and they were received in the drawing-room, and Cecily, who was crossing the hall with a stack of catalogued volumes, was required to stop and acknowledge them. Lady Meredith looked at her with a particular expression that had not changed since the first visit, the expression that categorized and filed without examining. Still here, she said. Not a question. Yes, my lady, Cecily said. Curious, Lady Forsyth said, her fan moving in a slow arc. We had understood the library position was proving, as it has before, untenable. I have found it very tenable, my lady, Cecily said. The library is in considerable disorder, but the work is interesting. Lady Forsyth's fan slowed. The work, she repeated. The catalogue, Cecily said. I have reorganized the East stacks by subject, and I am currently working on a cross-referenced index of the manuscript collection. A silence of the kind that is calibrated for maximum discomfort. Lady Meredith glanced at her mother. Lady Forsyth's expression had the quality of someone revising an assessment without intending to be seen doing so. The manuscript collection, Lady Forsyth said. I was not aware Ashvale had a manuscript collection worth indexing. It has a very fine one, Cecily said. Much of it in excellent condition. She excused herself and went back to the library. The Earl came to the library that evening, later than usual, and he stood in the doorway for a moment without coming in. Lady Forsyth tells me, he said, that you informed her the manuscript collection was in excellent condition. It is, Cecily said. She seemed surprised. She did not previously know about it, Cecily said. Most people do not. He came into the library and sat down in the chair by the reading table, the one he had claimed over the past weeks by the simple repetition of sitting in it. He looked at her over the lamp. Lord Gerald's letter, he said. Cecily set down her pen. Yes, my lord, I am aware of what is being said. I assumed you were, my lord. It is not, he said carefully, without foundation in the sense that I've spent more time in this library in the last 6 weeks than I've spent anywhere in this house in the last 3 years. He paused. That is not a reproach. I did not take it as one, Cecily said. He was quiet for a moment, his hand on the table in the way he held his hand when he was thinking past the point of easy speech. I am going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, which I believe you are capable of, though I am aware it may cost you. Ask, Cecily said. Are you content, he said, here, in this position? Setting aside the circumstances that brought you here and the circumstances Lord Gerald has created. Are you content? It was not the question she had expected. She considered it seriously, the way she had learned to consider serious questions, by setting aside what she was supposed to say and finding what she actually meant. Yes, she said, I find the work meaningful. I find this house, for all its difficulty, more honest than most of the places I could be. And I find, she said more slowly, that I have not, in 6 weeks, been required to be someone other than who I am. He looked at her. She did not look away. That is a considerable thing, he said. Yes, my lord, she said. I know. The north wing opened on the 49th day. She did not ask him to open it. She did not suggest it. She was in the library when he appeared in the doorway and said, without preamble, that he wanted to show her something. She followed him through the gallery and down the corridor that turned east. He took the key from his coat pocket and unlocked the door, and they went in. The room was cold and clean. Someone had maintained it against dust and damp, and she understood from this that the Earl had continued to send someone in to care for it, even while he sealed it, because care and access are not the same thing. The piano stood at the center of the room, a beautiful instrument, dark wood, the keys covered. Vent! On a table near the window were 2 small portraits in frames, a woman with dark eyes and a quality of attention that made the painted face feel present, and beside her, a smaller portrait that might have been the beginning of one, or simply the sketch of a face that had not had time to become a full likeness. Cecily did not speak. The Earl stood at a slight distance from the piano, his hands at his sides. She died in this room, he said. The boy was born in February. He did not survive the night. She held on for 3 more days. He was quiet. I was in this room for all of it, and when it was finished I could not determine what to do with any of it, so I left it exactly as it was. You play, Cecily said. Badly, he said. She taught me the basics. I have been, in the last 3 years, attempting to learn the rest. Alone, Cecily said. Not a question. It seemed appropriate, he said. She liked this room to be quiet. I could not think of anything else she had asked of me that I could still give her. Cecily looked at the piano. She looked at the portraits. She looked at the man standing in the room that he had made into a kind of temple out of grief and accuracy, and she felt, in her chest, the specific weight of admiration that is indistinguishable from something considerably more serious. "She sounds," Cecily said carefully, "as though she would have found that both touching and somewhat excessive." He looked at her sharply, and she held the look because she had meant it as the kind of truth that is worth the risk. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The thing before a smile, the threshold of it. "Yes," he said. She would. He crossed the room and removed the cover from the keys. He sat on the bench and he placed his hands on the keyboard. And he played badly as he had promised, with the specific tentativeness of someone who has learned something important without quite learning at all. The notes fell into the cold room and the gray light. And Cecily stood by the window and did not offer to improve what he was playing, because some things are not about improvement. When he finished, she said nothing for a moment, and then she said, "There is a manuscript in the library, the third one in the collection that has her name on the cover. It is a set of variations. I did not include it in the formal catalog. It seems to belong here." He turned on the bench to look at her. "Bring it," he said. "Please." She brought it that afternoon. She left it on the piano, and she left him in the room, and she went back to the library. And she sat at the reading table, and she pressed her hand flat against the surface of it, and felt, under her palm, the grain of the wood, and she let herself know, for the first time, what she had been building over the past 7 weeks that was not a catalogue. The confrontation arrived on the 56th day. Lady Forsyth had prevailed on the Earl to host a dinner, and the guest list included Lady Meredith and Lord Gerald, and 6 others from the neighboring families. And Cecily was not at the dinner because she was not a guest, but a member of the staff, which everyone present understood, and which no one said. She ate in the housekeeper's room with Mrs. Prentice, and was reading when she heard the drawing-room empty into the gallery around 10 in the evening. She heard Lord Gerald's voice, carrying. "The situation is irregular," he said, with the precision of a man who has prepared his argument. "You will grant me that, Calloway. Whatever her credentials, a woman in that position, alone with the family collections, available at odd hours, it invites speculation." She could not hear the Earl's reply. It was too low. "Speculation attaches to her," Lord Gerald said. "Not to you, of course. It never attaches to a man of your rank. It will follow her. And I think you know it." She heard Lady Meredith's voice, quieter, but carrying in the way voices carry through old houses. "She is perfectly pleasant, of course. One simply wonders if she understands her position." "Her position," Lord Gerald said, "is that of a woman without family, without resources, and without the sense to know when she has overstayed." "The librarian Gerald," he said to himself, with the particular inflection of someone returning to a word they have already decided is sufficient. Cecily set down her book. Mrs. Prentice, across the table, had gone very still. "I am going to my room," Cecily said. She stood, and she was composed, and she went. She did not hear the Earl's response because she was already on the stairs. She did not know, in that moment, that he had heard every word she heard, and that the expression on his face, turned toward Lord Gerald in the gallery, was not the expression of a man considering the argument, but of a man who has finished considering it. She pressed the comb against her palm in the dark of her room, and made herself count the things she knew to be true. The catalogue was good work. She had done it well. She had not made the error of wanting something she could not have, which was the error she had been most afraid of making, and she had not, she thought, made it. She had only thought about making it. Almost every day, and particularly in the evenings. This she would not in the dark pretend otherwise. She was still sitting on the edge of the bed when she heard the knock. It was not a servant's knock. She had learned, without quite deciding, to the difference. She opened the door. He was standing in the corridor in his dinner coat, which he had not yet removed, and his face had the quality she had seen once before in the gallery, with the manuscript stripped of its practiced arrangement. "I heard," Cecily said. "Not accusation, information." "I know," he said. "I am sorry." "You are not required to be sorry for what other people say." "My lord, I am required," he said, "to have said something sooner than I did." She looked at him. He looked at her. The corridor was entirely quiet. "Miss Barrow," he said, and then he stopped. "Cecily," she said. "Not correction. Permission." He took a breath, and she felt the quality of it, the weight of a thing being decided, and her own pulse was audible in her throat in the particular way that it had been, at intervals, for the past 7 weeks. "I am going to ask you to do something," he said. "Something you will consider whether to accept. You are under no obligation to accept it." "Ask," she said. "Come with me tomorrow morning," he said, "to the drawing room. When Lord Gerald arrives to discuss the terms of the Forsyth interest in the Eastern Field lease, come as my particular guest. Sit at the table as someone the house has claimed." She looked at him. She knew what he was saying. The drawing room at 9 in the morning with Lord Gerald present was not a private invitation. "And Lady Meredith," she said. "Lady Meredith," he said carefully, "will understand, or she will not, and it will not alter the matter." He held her gaze with a steadiness that was not composure, but its opposite, a man who had taken apart his composure and was standing without it, which was, she understood, the most costly thing he knew how to do. She said yes. She came down the main stair the following morning in her best gown, which was not equal to the drawing-room's expectations, and which she wore anyway because she had never been equal to the drawing-room's expectations and had survived it, and because the point was not the gown. Lord Gerald was already there when she arrived, seated across from the Earl, with Lady Meredith at his side, in ivory and green. Lady Forsyth had not come. Perhaps she knew. Perhaps she had decided not to witness it. Lord Gerald looked at Cecily with the expression of a man whose argument has just been answered before he could make it. Lady Meredith said very precisely, "The librarian." The Earl rose. He crossed the room to where Cecily stood near the door, and he took her hand, gloved in his, and he turned with her to face Lord Gerald and Lady Meredith. "Miss Cecily Barrow," he said, "is my particular guest at this table. She will remain at Ashvale at my invitation, in whatever capacity she chooses, for as long as she will stay." Lord Gerald cleared his throat. "Calloway, I must say—" "You may say what you wish to say," the Earl said, his voice perfectly level. "When we have concluded the matter of the Eastern Field lease, to which Miss Barrow is welcome to contribute as she has more understanding of the estate's organizational requirements than I have had in several years." Lady Meredith's hands went still in her lap. Lord Gerald looked at his sister. Something passed between them, an adjustment, a revision. "Of course," Lord Gerald said at last. Cecily sat down at the table. The Earl sat beside her. The fire was going, and the October light was thin and clear through the tall windows, and Lord Gerald began to speak about the Eastern Field, and she listened and offered, twice, observations that were accurate, and that he received with the particular stiffness of a man who has not previously been required to receive observations from a woman without resources. She caught the Earl's eye once across the table. He was not smiling. The line of his jaw had eased in the way that it eased, she had learned, when he was at his most settled. She looked back at Lord Gerald and continued. By November, the north wing was no longer sealed. This did not mean it was open to the household in general. It meant that the Earl spent more mornings in it than he had before, and that the piano could be heard from the gallery on certain evenings, and that the manuscripts had been moved from the library to a cabinet in the north wing with a catalogue card of their own, written in Cecily's hand with a notation reading only personal collection, intact. It meant also that she had been in the room 6 times, and that she had learned to sit near the window without speaking, while he played badly and with increasing confidence, and that he had learned in the same time the particular quality of her silence, which was not absence but company. The formal matter was arranged in late November by a solicitor named Ashworth, who arrived from London with the correct documents, and a manner designed to make large things look procedural. He was received in the study. Cecily was not present for the legal portion of it, because that was not the portion that required her. What required her was the conversation in the library afterwards, in the firelight, with the rain against the windows, and the catalog spread out between them, and the Earl saying with the directness that was, she had come to understand, the shape his feeling took, when he had finished being careful with it. I have spoken to Ashworth. There is no legal impediment. There is no social impediment that I am prepared to treat as one. There is the question of what you want, which I regard as the only remaining impediment, and which I will not determine for you. I want, Cecily said, to continue the catalogue. The index is not finished. He looked at her, and she said, I want whatever this is, which I am aware is a complicated thing, and I am aware that I am not who the drawing room would have chosen for you, and I am aware that you know this also, and have not found it an impediment. And on that basis I think we understand each other well enough to proceed. He was quiet for a moment. I used her name, he said, in the north wing. Some weeks ago, in the early morning, I believe you heard me. Yes, Cecily said. Cadis. I want you to understand, he said carefully, that she is not a reason I cannot do this. She is a reason I know what this costs, and what it is worth. Cecily looked at him across the library table in the firelight, with the rain making its slow argument against the glass, and she felt the thing that had been building since the ladder, since the gallery, since the corridor in the gray before dawn, arrive in her chest as something that had no reasonable word for it in any of the 3 languages she could read. Ambrose, she said, not correction, the opening of a new country. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and neither of them moved for a moment, in the way of people who have arrived somewhere. They expected to be further from the fire. Crackled. The rain continued. In the spring, when the catalogue was finished and the index was completed and bound, Cecily placed it on the library shelf beside the Huffin folios and wrote on its spine the words, Ashvale Hall Library, a complete catalogue and index. She did not put her name on the spine. She put it on the inside cover, on the title page, in the place where careful work records the person who made it. Cecily Calloway, Countess of Ashvale. Completed in the library, this house. This spring the tortoiseshell comb sat on the dressing table in the room that was now hers, in the house that was now her own. She had placed it there on the morning she moved her things from the small room by the stairs, and she had not needed to press her palm to it since. The north wing was quiet as it had always been. Now the piano could be heard from the gallery in the evenings, and sometimes, if the door was left ajar, you could hear 2 voices, the unsteady progression of a man still learning, and the lower, steadier movement of someone who had learned how to share the room with what it held. If Cecily's story stayed with you, leave a word in the comments for her. She earned it. The manuscripts were never moved again. The portraits remained as they were. On the table below the smaller portrait, Cecily placed a single late-blooming sprig from the garden, changed each week, because it seemed to her that care and access are not the same thing, but both are necessary, and the room had asked for both for long enough. She kept her promise to the house. She left the north wing exactly as it was, and she loved the man who had made it what it was, and she let him go on teaching her the specific weight of tending what you cannot undo. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was in the end everything.